and I spoke and said we're going to attend. So thank you. Charlie. Charlie Angus is a former MP for the Timmins James Bay, serving 2 decades from his first election in 2004. He has been the NDP critic for ethics, natural resources, fedor, Indigenous youth, income inequality, and affordable, and deputy critic for Labour. Charlie is a member of the Council of the Canadians and was instrumental in developing the Pledge for Canadians. He is an author of 9 books, including the most recent, Dangerous Memory. Charlie is a songwriter, musician, and band leader for the Juno-nominated Grievous Angels. He is a grassroots activist and leader with the resistance of the Magus Canadian Network. Welcome to the podium, Charlie Angus.
Thank you, my brothers and sisters, my friends. You're all quitting. Go ahead. You're not a quitter. Of course you're not a quitter. You're in Oshawa. I want to thank you, brothers and sisters, for the invitation to be here tonight, to be in this hall, Local 222. Because you have always been on the front lines of worker rights, of improving conditions. And I don't have to tell you that nobody ever did Labour any favors, but we got because people stood up. I come from mining country. My grandfather, Charlie Angus, came from the Hawk Hill tenements of Dundee, Scotland. He died at the shop floor. I was born 6 months later. Being Scottish, we just recycled names. That's where my name's from. My other grandfather, Joe McNeil, broke his back underground and then was slowly poisoned for years on surface. My Uncle Lindsay worked in the mines as a young lad and decided he wanted to go to university and became a trade diplomat. That was what was possible when you were a working class kid then. You could go from the mines to becoming a trade diplomat. And then Lindsay died young from radiation poisoning that he had contracted on the job. And that was the way it was. There's not a family where I come from that we haven't seen someone get lost or someone injured or someone killed. And today, mining jobs are the highest paid. We have many young women working in the mines. We have standards that we never had before, and we have those standards because people stood up and fought for it. And that's what people have done in Oshawa. So I want to talk a bit about why it's so important, the threat we're facing. On my way down, I got interviewed by local Ontario CBC, and they asked me the question, well, when we sign a trade deal, does that mean your resistance tour is over? I would love that to be the case. But the bad news is I don't think Donald Trump has any intention of signing any kind of agreement. It's about the fairness and respect. We're watching a country disintegrate south of the border. With political assassinations this week, we see the chaos in Europe with Russia firing drones into Poland, putting us on the highest level of threat since the 1940s. And Donald Trump was like, whoa, here we go. No, Donald, we don't say here we go. You say as the United States we're going to stand up and protect the rule of law. But he's not about protecting the rule of law. And that's why we need to focus this on the threat that's there. Because once we can see what the threat is, we can choose how to resist it. Because I know we will resist it. This is not about getting a better deal on soybeans. Donald Trump says that our copper is a national security threat to the United States. Copper drives the world economy. Every house in the United States has about 450 pounds of copper. And as you know, as auto workers, every car has about 50 pounds of copper. And he doesn't want Canada's copper? Well, yeah, we'll sell it to Germany. They'll take our copper. And we'll sell it to Asia. But for Donald Trump to say that he's not wanting our copper shows that it's not about American jobs. I don't think he gives a damn about American jobs. It's like the way he said aluminum is a threat to America's economy. He's going to make America great in aluminum. Well, the reason Canada, and it's Quebec, has the lead in aluminum is because the amount of power that's needed, and because Quebec is public power, they can make the aluminum. If Donald Trump wants to invest in public power in the United States, well, great. But he's not going to. And I mention this because I was talking to a guy who bids on big arena projects. He explained to me, you can't get the aluminum from the United States the way you can get it from Quebec. It's competitive. But the aluminum then crosses the border, and then the insulation is added to it. And it may cross the border back to Canada to be painted. And then it may go to a baseball arena in Kansas City to be put up. And when they bid on the aluminum, they're bidding projects 4 to 5 years in advance, because by the time they get to the aluminum, everything else has to get built first. And this guy who comes from generations of doing these projects, his family, this is what they do. He said, we can't bid because we don't know what the price of aluminum is going to be. So Donald Trump is creating chaos in an industry that he can easily exempt. But boy, he wants to come after the auto workers. You are the front line and you know it. And we have to hold that front line because we haven't seen any indication at any level that they are looking for reasonable rates with any other nation. And when Donald Trump made his threats, only 2 countries stood up to him. The EU did not stand up. You know, one of the biggest trading blocs in the world could have just said, go stuff it, Donald, it ain't going to happen. They didn't say that. The UK didn't say that. It was China and it was Canada. And they picked on Canada because they thought we were pushovers. Who would be easier to pick on than Canadians? Because we don't shoot our mouths off. And then they learn very quickly that you can't push Canadians around when it comes to a matter of principle. We may be sorry, sorry, you want to get out of your way, sorry, can we accommodate you? But if you are going to push someone around, do not push a Canadian around. And Donald Trump has been shocked, and the language coming out of the United States towards us has been escalating. I want to say this, not to frighten you, because I don't have to frighten you, you know how serious it is. But the language that's coming towards Canada gets increasingly aggressive. The way Putin threatened Ukraine, we have Kash Patel, that loser who runs the FBI, saying that Canada is flooding the United States with terrorists. Maybe it's all the tubes that they saw. And then Kristi Noem in Michigan holding a forum about the threat to the northern border. Us. And now Pam Bondi saying that we are responsible for international human trafficking. Us. And so when American governors come up and say, come on, Canada, we miss you. What I want to hear those American governors say is, Canada, we get that the rule of law is being threatened in our nation. And we understand that over 150 Canadians have been kidnapped off the streets and are being held in these detention centers that they apparently concrete floors and light bulbs 24/7. And they have not been able to get access to proper legal or even to their families. I'd like to hear those American governors say, Canada, we will speak up for your citizens who are being kidnapped. Because that's not what civilized countries do. So that's what we're facing. But what is it that we are going to go back with? That's why Oshawa is so important in this story. Because right now, you are in the crucible. And I'm so glad to hear that Shift 3, there's been an extension. We need to really keep pressure on the government to do whatever it takes to make sure that our automotive sector is not left high and dry. If we're going to be building the vehicles to help Ukraine and Latvia, then let's build them. We can build them. We can build them right here. Because we've got to get through the short-term crisis in order to get to a long-term solution. That's how we're going to have to see this. We're in the storm. And we'll get through the storm by doing a number of things. Number one is the boycott. Now, again, when I was on CBC, they said, oh, yeah, well, there was that boycott this spring, and then, you know, it kind of petered out. And I said, well, who have you been talking to? I said, I don't hear anything about the boycott of Canadian media, but I'll tell you what I hear in American media. They're freaking out. $29 billion loss this year to the American tourism industry because of Canada. Here, that's us, yeah. Travel America said that Canada was the greatest and most reliable ally of the United States, and their industry is based on Canadian visits, and that is dry up. The mayor of Las Vegas is complaining that travel from Canada went from a faucet to a drip. And then she complained that the high-paying Europeans aren't coming either. They're coming here. They're coming to Canada. The thing that I've been learning from my work is the amount of people around the world who are looking to us right now. They see us as the line in the sand for democracy. It may not seem like we're doing much, but we're doing a hell of a lot. CNBC predicts a possible $90 billion hit to the American economy this year, from what originated in Canada and what's been going around the world. And it's hurting. It's hurting a lot. You know, I read from the head of the California Wine Association, their California wine market has just disappeared. They didn't know that the LCBO in Ontario was the biggest purchaser of spirits in the world, and when we took it off the shelves, well, they had no place to sell it. Well, you should have done your homework first. But you know, Robert Pope, who was the head of the California Wine Association, said these aren't just wine bottles, these are families, these are industries. We get it. We know it's true. But I'm going to tell you that I'm getting messages from Americans because I talk to people every day throughout Canada, and it wasn't something I expected. I talked to a woman in Kentucky who said her son was on the Jim Beam line.
Standing right in the way.
Canada.
You were right in the way of the camera.
But if I sit down in my chair, will I be blocking?
No, your chair's fine.
Okay, sorry.
She wrote to me and she said, you have to keep it up. Even though it's hurting us, we need you to keep the pressure on, because by you keeping the pressure on, it's going to make it harder for Donald Trump to continue his attacks against his own people. That's the thing to keep in mind here. We are not doing this to the Americans to be mean. They are our relatives, they are our cousins, we've traveled back and forth across the border. But it is the one tool that we have to put pressure on. Because if he's not feeling the heat from his senators and his governors, he's going to try and crush us. He said that. He said it again and again. He would use economic power to break Canada. Well, he ain't going to break us. But he's not going to break Oshawa. But we have to keep that pressure, and that's the pressure that you folks are doing. And what we're doing as Canadians is extraordinary, because nobody told us to do this. Nobody instructed us, nobody had a plan. You just decided, I don't like getting pushed around. Consider that I call it the Juno Beach gene, you know? We come from a long line of fascist fighters, you know? All our uncles went over. Everyone. And they came back and they never talked about it. I saw the Sherman tank there from the Ontario Tank Corps. My Uncle Len was in the Ontario tanks. I didn't know a thing about what he'd done. They never talked about it. They were at the Battle of Ortona. They broke the Hitler line. They did all that to free other people. And they came home and they didn't brag about it. But Canadians in the war, they said it was a rock job. You give it to a Canadian because the Canadians get the job done. That's our backbone. That's who we are. So we're in the fight for our lives. And I just want to go back to Oshawa for a moment, because this isn't the first time we've been on the front lines. And this isn't the first time the odds have been huge against you. You know, I think back to the early 1980s when they were breaking the industrial working class across North America, and plant after plant after plant shut down. And the workers in Oshawa occupied the Hudai plant because they were going to walk away with money that had been given them. They weren't going to even pay the severances. This was KKR, one of those bandit companies of junk bomb raiders, and Hudai was going to be the place where they took the money and ran. And the workers walked in and locked that plant. And they went right to the wall, and the result was Conservative government, Bill Davis stepped in and changed the labor laws of Ontario forever so that anytime someone gets laid off, they get paid. Anytime someone loses their job, they get the severances. That was because of Oshawa. It was at a time when we were losing millions of jobs, and Oshawa said, we don't give up. And Bob White, talking about the no concessions policy, they said he was insane. If you look back at the newspaper articles at the time, man, you guys were like evil incarnate. You were crazy. You were going to destroy the economy. Oh my God, those auto workers, what the heck are they doing? They said no concessions. We're not giving anything up, because if we give up, they'll keep coming. And when he brought the workers out of GM here in Oshawa in '84, the headlines were, this is the end of the world. And they said, GM's going to pull out of Canada. GM didn't pull out of Canada. And the auto workers showed that when you stand up in tough times and you say no concessions, it's because it's a bigger principle. And I would argue right now that this is the time to say no concessions. Because every time we show a concession to Donald Trump, we're not getting respect back. He's just ratcheting up the pressure. So that's the difficult, dark story. I'd like to tell you that someone's coming to say this, nobody is. But what I will say is that there is nothing like the Canadian solidarity that we're seeing right now. We just have to hold to that. And when I see people across this country doing their part of making choices of what they're going to buy, by themselves, it's not a big deal. But when every Canadian does it, it is a massive deal. And the rest of the world is watching us. And they're watching you, Oshawa. So we're going to be in for some really tough times ahead. But we're watching absolute chaos south of the border. It looks like there's no rhyme or reason, but it is the attack on the rule of law. It's the disintegration of democracy on our unguarded border. And we can't let that cross the border. We can't become a vassal state. We can't agree that we're going to go along to get along, because when you go along with gangsters, you've all seen Goodfellas, things going to end well. But if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to get through this. And I feel, if you ask me if I'm optimistic, I'm not optimistic at all. Nope. Sorry about that. But I'm super hopeful. I feel hopeful every day because of the people that I meet who are determined to do their part. And if we're willing to do our part as Canadians, we're going to get through this. I'll leave it to the Prime Minister on what the tariff rates are going to be in our negotiations. That's not my job. I trust that he's got a plan. I hope to God he's got a plan. But what I know is that my job out there is to talk to Canadians and say, we can do this, and we will do this, and we're not going to bend, we're not going to break, and we're not going to kiss a gangster's ring. Not now, not ever, because we as a people are true, north, strong, and free, and we will always be that. So Oshawa, it sucks to be on the front lines. I know, but you've been here before, and we've got your back, and we've got to keep talking about the communities that are on the front lines. We've got to keep building solidarity, and we're going to get through this. This is how we're going to get through this. But pretending that it's not a threat is not going to help. But I don't think I have to tell you that you know what we're looking at and what we're dealing with, but we're going to get there. So, my friends, it's going to be a number of hours before we get to daylight, but we're going to get there. And in the meantime, I propose we just got to keep kicking at that darkness, and it's going to finally start to bleed daylight, and we're going to be okay. So thank you very much.